Sometimes in diabetes, it is going to be the exact same thing. You are going to get knocked down. You're going to literally fall on your face. You are going to get smacked around by the blood sugars a little bit. The blood sugars are going to come in and say, hey, I'm going to go low just to mess with you. Or, hey, I'm going to go high even though you dosed what seemed to be perfectly for this meal. And you know what? You get to control how you respond to it. And you get to determine, hey, am I going to get up or am I going to let diabetes win? I have tried and tried and tried, but I always go low when I do any sort of activity. Welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we take all of the mysteries of blood sugar control, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and any of the other 40 plus factors that may impact your blood sugar. If you don't know me, my name is Ben Zeal. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength and conditioning coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. And I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode. Welcome to this episode of the Your Diabetes Insider podcast. Today, we're going to do a solo one, and this is a topic where I feel like it's talked about a bunch in diabetes land, but it's just not quite completely understood. Because if I had $1 for the number of times that I would hear the following statement, I could probably buy both you and I side seats to an NBA game. And I'm not talking like, oh, let's go to the Atlanta Hawks game. No offense if you're a Hawks fan, but I'm talking, a Lakers game or a team that's relevant that people really like. Maybe, well, the Heat I would say is a good example, but that's not. Maybe a Lakers game, maybe a Knicks game, something that's high profile. And that statement would be, I have tried and tried and tried, but I always go low when I do any sort of activity that lasts more than 45 minutes to an hour. And it wasn't always said verbatim. It's always some derivative of it, but you get the idea. Longer duration activity is the bane of many people with diabetes existence. And it's something that it's understood, but it just drives a lot of people crazy. So I want to put a lot of these things to rest for you today. I want to put them to rest so you don't have to stress about them. You have a better idea of what you're doing going in. And I have a fantastic example to draw upon recently where I was fortunate enough on my honeymoon to go to Greece. And the island of Crete is absolutely beautiful. It has the best food I've ever had in my entire life. And I love food, so that's saying something, right? And they have these magnificent views and magnificent waterfronts, but they also have one of the most insane hikes I've ever done in my entire life. It's called the Samaria Gorge, and it's legitimately a gorge. But what ends up happening is you have to get driven to the top of this gorge. So it was about an hour-long ride. If you're on a bus, it might take a little bit longer. And you're at the top and you hike all the way down. So you're going downhill, and you might think, oh, whatever, it's not a big deal. It's just a little bit of a hike. This is one of those, hey, I'm signing up to do this all day kind of things, because it is going to take you 4, 5, 6 hours to do this hike. And it's beautiful. The views are unlike anything I've ever seen. You get to the bottom and you are literally at the ocean. You are at the sea. The only way to get out of the town at the bottom of this gorge at the end where this beach is via boat. And if you don't get out on the boat, which there's one boat per day, then you are stuck in that town. And it wouldn't be the worst thing. It's a beautiful town, right? But the reason I'm telling you this is this hike, when we looked it up, it said it was about 13 to 14 kilometers in total. When all was said and done, we ended up going about 20. And I'm talking in kilometers because it was in Europe and they use the metric system. So if we're going 20 kilometers in miles, we're looking at 12 and change. That's a lot of mileage to log. And that is an absolute recipe for blood sugar disaster if you are not careful when it comes to this. This is the quintessential long duration activity. You're going downhill. Thankfully, we had beautiful weather. It wasn't too warm. But you could equate this same hike to, I'm going to be playing sports all day. If you're a kid or you're a teen or you're a competitive athlete of some sort. Hey, I'm going to go on a hike in my own town. I'm going to go camping and we're going to go out into nature. We're going to go kayaking all day. Whatever it is, you can equate this type of situation to that exact hike that I just did. And before I even go into this, before I really, really dive in, I want to also just use this as a point to challenge yourself a little bit. because you absolutely can. You absolutely can do these things, diabetes or not. But if you have diabetes and you are listening to this, as you very likely do, or someone you know and love and are very close to has it, challenge yourself to do these things. Your blood sugars can handle it. I'm grateful. My blood sugars did not vary. They were within a 20-point radius, basically. Up 20 or down 20 from where I started, which you ask me is pretty fantastic for a hike of that duration. But I did the steps to prepare ahead of time. And these are some of the things I want to share with you to make sure your next long duration activity goes magnificently. Because again, in a situation like this, these are views that you cannot see anywhere else, I'd imagine, in the world. But for sure, these are very, very, very limited time only types of views. There's nature untouched. We saw a pack of goats, like a wild pack of sheep and goats. And I don't even know if you call them a pack. Maybe I know geese are a gaggle, or crows have some other term. But you get what I'm saying. There's all just herds, that's the word, nailed it. There are herds of goats and sheep just roaming up here. Like, it was insane. There's all sorts of other nature. There's views that are unparalleled. The actual gorge itself, you go from this crazy wild forest to this area that's rushing full of water where the people get the town where water is bottled for the entire country because the water is so pure coming from here. So it was incredible. So challenge yourself is my first thing. If you're not sure, hey, I don't know if I could do this, I want you to really challenge yourself. And maybe you don't do the full 20-kilometer thing. Maybe you pick something that's a little bit easier to start out with, but really take that time to challenge yourself. Throw yourself into nature, throw yourself into some activity, because the majority of the time you end up feeling a lot better after. So the first thing I really want to emphasize here is filling up your gas tank ahead of time. And by gas tank, I mean fueling your body. And by fueling your body ahead of time, I mean the day of as well as previous days leading up to it. So if you're a NASCAR fan or you're a person who, loves cars, if you're trying to drive on a road trip even, let's say, or you're trying to do your, NASCAR race, you're probably going to make sure your gas tank is full ahead of time so you can stop as few times as possible, right? If you're going on a road trip and you're driving from, say, New York to California, and your goal is to get there as quick as humanly possible, safely, of course, you're probably filling up your gas tank before you leave. So you're not 30 minutes into the ride and looking at the gas tank and saying, oh, my gas tank's low, right? You're probably filling it up ahead of time. It's the same thing when it comes to some sort of long duration type of activity. You are going to want to pay attention to your fuel. And if you are somebody who is going into this and maybe you're thinking, I don't usually eat much of a breakfast before I do anything in life, you might want to reconsider your strategy. If the night before you're kind of like, I'll eat a normal dinner, you might want to rethink your normal strategy. And I say this with all the love in the world because your body is going to expend far more energy than it's used to. You are not doing the normal level of activity that your body typically does, unless you're someone who hikes 20 miles a day or 20 kilometers a day. And if for that, you are the exception to the rule here. But think about it. If you are doing a normal workout, you go and you say, hey, I'm going to go do my 1 hour workout at the gym. I do this 5 days a week and I usually get 6,000 steps per day. That's what your body is used to. So your normal level of intake of food will be able to fuel that. But once you start getting above and beyond that, you are going to start tapping into your fuel reserves, which otherwise are known as your glycogen, which is stored in both your muscles as well as your liver. And what you're going to basically want to do ahead of time is you're going to want to fill up those stores. You're going to want to have them topped off. So I'm not telling you to take the marathon runner approach where you eat 600 carbs of pasta the 2 days before the race, because that might be a little obscene. But at the same time, having some additional fuel in your tank is going to go a very long way. The 2 days leading up, maybe consider having some additional food in your life. Maybe if you're not someone who pays much attention to your intake, make a conscious effort to eat a little bit more, have an additional snack, maybe increase the size of your dinner, because that way you're going to do, if you do it correctly, you will do what is known as super compensation, where your stores are filled to the brim, you've got the gas in the tank of your car, you've got a little bit of extra fuel as well, and you're ready to roll. And the day of, you're making sure you have adequate fuel ahead of time. And this can become a little bit of a balancing act because it does depend on when you start said activity, because of the next thing I'm about to mention, which we'll get into in just a second. But you're going to want to make sure you have this fuel in your system, because what's going to happen if you've heard it, I don't know if you're a marathon running person. I certainly am not. I did 1 year of cross country in high school and that was plenty for me. But there's a term in marathon running and long distance running called bonking, which is basically you hit a wall. You're at the mile 16 mark, mile 17 mark, mile 21 mark, and you just hit a wall and you feel like you just cannot keep going, which ironically, a lot of times these people are experiencing what we know as a low blood sugar. But the reality is they run out of gas. They run out of fuel. You're at mile 21. You only had 26.2 to go. You only had 5 extra miles to go, which at that point, what's another 5 miles? You've already gone 21. Again, don't sign me up, but you see what I'm saying. You've got to make sure the fueling is on point, and not just ahead of time, but also throughout. So when we went on our hike in this situation, every 60 to 90 minutes, I'm having some sort of snack. I'm having a carb source, potentially. Obviously everybody's different with carbs and not carbs. So AKA carbs versus fat is your primary fuel source. But I'm having some form of carbs, keep my number steady, know I'm going to burn through it. And then every hour or so, I'd say every hour and a half, I'm having a little bit of protein with it. So easiest example to tell you here would be half of a protein bar. I split it with Amelia and we're good. And why I would do this, the protein's going to help stabilize things a little bit. The carbs are going to help give me a little energy to keep on going, to keep on fueling. And there were people that we saw pull off and go take a picnic. There was an old settlement, we're talking ancient settlement from probably a couple thousand years ago, where they had taken a couple of the buildings and they had renovated them into bathrooms and areas out of the sun. And there were some people taking picnics and, setting up a blanket and all that. We weren't really about that life. We wanted to make sure we made it to that boat. But what I will say is in this case, they were playing it smart as well. They're stopping, they're doing a full-blown meal to refill up their fuel reserves and then keep going. In our case, we took it a little bit differently. We said, hey, we had a massive breakfast, and I mean massive. The best part about being in Greece was they had the legit Greek yogurt, and man, did I crush that stuff while we were there. But the Greek yogurt, the eggs, they had sausage, they had bacon, they had something carb related. They had fruit, and they have the best fruit. But I know we had fruit. I think Amelia had something that it wasn't oatmeal, but it was very similar. But again, they had the carb sources there. There was a little bit of everything for this complete meal that I knew was going to have to be big because we weren't going to be able to eat a legit meal for a long time. So of course, snacks throughout. If you want to stop and have that, that meal during the activity, go for it. Now, it may not be possible. If you're playing a volleyball tournament, you're probably not going to be able to stop and have a legit meal unless you have a couple hours between games or an hour between games. And in that case, I would still stick to something a little bit more snack-like. Maybe you have half of a turkey sandwich or something like that, where it's not going to sit super heavy, but it's going to be enough to still give you that boost, give you those few extra carbs, and give you that little bit of protein to keep your number steady. Massive, 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 massively important. And I cannot emphasize enough how important that this is. And this was a fueling process we did throughout the entire time. I think the hike took us in total, we stopped a bunch and we took pictures, all that deal. But it took us about 5 hours. So when I'm talking every, hour to hour and a half, I'm not kidding. We probably stopped 4 or 5 times just for the sake of fueling. And in terms of another option, this is another thing that it's newer on my radar. It's something I've known about for a while, but haven't really tried as much, but I've seen amazing results. I've had patients that have used this and they've done it for marathons. They've done it for half marathons. They've done it for as, quick as something like a CrossFit workout, but you can would be another option that I would definitely consider for stabilizing blood sugars. And when you're thinking, okay, well, what is UCAN? UCAN is basically this super starch. It was developed for people that have an issue with storing glycogen, right? So they have a disorder or disease or whatever you want to call it. We can cut that part stuff. They have a situation within their body where they cannot store glycogen. And as a result of that, what ends up happening? Well, they need to eat every couple hours or their body tries to burn through glycogen that it doesn't have and things don't go very well. And so in this case, this is basically a very slow digesting starch. So because it's a slow digesting starch, it basically breaks down over time, similar to how protein would do for us, and it keeps your blood sugar more steady. So definitely would recommend that for longer duration activity as well. And you could even stack it on, right? Think of it as a sandwich of sorts where you could have, your baseline level of UCAN. You start, I have a little bit at the beginning, maybe you have a little bit at the halfway mark. Then in between that, hey, I need a little bit of a pick-me-up. Here's my half of a protein bar. Here's my protein. Here's my carb source. You can stack things. You can figure out what is that best configuration for you, depending on the activity, depending on the intensity, etc. I cannot emphasize enough how important the fueling process will be for you. Now, when it comes to the next part, remember I mentioned you have to be a little careful about that meal beforehand. That is because you've got to consider the insulin adjustments that you are going to make. And again, cannot emphasize how important this is. We're talking beyond, if you're on an insulin pump, beyond just letting the algorithm do its thing and saying, hey, I'm in activity mode. Because as much as it's nice to have these algorithms, they definitely have their own set of limitations. And when you get completely reliant on an algorithm, it doesn't usually end well. And that is my biggest concern about some of these systems that are coming out. But I digress. Separate episode, separate conversation. So when it comes to this, you are going to want to adjust your insulin prior. I'm talking basal rates. I'm talking boluses, because you've probably seen, I've posted about it on social media plenty, but you're going to want to have as minimal active insulin as possible during an activity like this. Why? Because like we've talked about before, active insulin, once you're active, is going to get potentiated. It's going to become stronger. And then as a result of that, your blood sugar is likely going to drop very quickly, because your 1.2 units might start acting more like 3.2 units. So keep that part in mind. And in terms of the reason to really illustrate why it's so important to adjust your active insulin. So I played volleyball in high school as a kid. So I played baseball, also played volleyball. We had dudes volleyball up in good old Wisconsin. And I played for a few years in high school. And during the tryout week, it was magnificent. Well, depending on how you want to look at it. So they would have conditioning for the first couple hours. Then there might be a few drills, but you would get a 2-hour break for lunch. And I use break loosely because the unwritten rule was that you're supposed to eat your lunch, but then immediately after you're supposed to go jump into pickup games, scrimmages against the other people at the tryout. And then after that, you would then go do a lot more volleyball specific drills and, serving and hitting and all that kind of stuff. And then they would eventually, pick the team. But you're there from 9 a.m., 9:30 a.m. until 4 to 4:30 in the afternoon. And you're basically going straight through. I had an insulin pump. I vividly remember I was in my sophomore year of high school. Had an insulin pump, did not have a CGM. CGMs were not all the rage back then. So I'm finger sticking. And I also knew I was going to be running around like a crazy person. So I had no insulin for that entire time. And I don't necessarily recommend this looking back, but let's add up all the factors, right? No insulin during that whole time. Did not dose for my 90 carb lunch. Ended up having an 128 carb Gatorade. Was in perpetual motion the entire time. Tested my blood sugar when it was all said and done. When I was done, we were about to go leave, and my blood sugar was 90. So if that doesn't emphasize how important it is to really consider dialing back on your insulin, whether it is the basal rate, whether it is the boluses, I don't know what will. I had over 200 grams of carbs and basically no insulin for 7 hours. 7 hours? 7 hours. And my blood sugar remained in range pretty much the entire time, because activity can be that intense. So you're going to want to pay attention to things like that. And again, you can go into activity mode if you're on a pump, totally acceptable. Remember, start it an hour before you're going to actually need it. But when it comes to taking insulin for that meal you eat beforehand, for those snacks you have on the way, you're going to want to be very, very conservative, because once you have that active insulin, remember, let's say you take that 1 unit bolus, you're now stuck with that 1 unit bolus. 90% of it's going to be there for the next 2 hours. So you're either going to have to consider eating more, or you're going to have to consider thinking about, well, snap, I probably shouldn't have taken that full unit when I would normally need to take, a unit. I probably could have taken a quarter of that, or a third of that, or half of that. You're going to want to decrease it. And that is something you're going to want to work on with your care team. If you don't have a quality care team, you might know a couple really good dietitian, diabetes educators, and strength coaches. Psst, hint, hint. Anyways, but you're going to want to make sure you sort that out with your care team ahead of the activity, because otherwise you are, again, setting yourself up for a lot of lows and potentially a lot of highs, depending on how you look at things. So you have to really be careful with that. Of course, you're bringing low snacks with you. Of course, you're bringing, potentially Gatorade or Body Armor or any of the other things that will help keep you hydrated that can be a quick carb source, but you're going to want to adjust your insulin, because once you're in motion, especially if it's hours on end, you are not going to want to be stopping. And in our case, we really couldn't stop. Remember, there's a boat leaving at 5:30. I don't remember exactly what time we got dropped off at the top. It was probably 10 something. But if we knew it was going to be a 4 to 5 hour hike, if we had to stop for a really long period of time, it wasn't going to happen. We were going to be stuck in this town and we were going to literally miss the boat. So keep that part in mind. So number one, you're fueling up your gas tank. You're fueling up your reserves. You're having fuel consistently. But two, you're adjusting that insulin. Numero tres. And this is a big one. And this one can help prevent the highs as well, and also prevent you from feeling like you were by a dump truck. the next day and that evening or later that day. Hydration. And that is something that everybody is always, oh, I'll hydrate. I'll drink a little bit of water at baseline. And again, I'm very, very, very particular with hydration with the people that I work with and that my team works with. But I'd rather you be a little overhydrated than underhydrated, especially with a longer duration activity like this. And this could also, I'm thinking about this now too, like this could qualify if you're moving, like if you're moving out of your apartment and you're moving to another one or something like that, this would be exactly the same thing if you're the one moving all your stuff. Because it's an all day activity. It takes seemingly forever and people love to forget to eat while they're moving. I had a time, I remember in retrospect, I think it was one of the last times I moved. It was probably 4 years ago. Yeah. 4.5 years ago. I remember I was the one responsible for loading up the truck and unloading the truck and going from the storage unit to that place and here and there. And you just straight up forget to eat. So this could qualify for moving. This could qualify for anything, right? Hydrating is going to be huge, especially while it's hot outside. But even if it's not, you're still going to want to hydrate. The winter is deceptive because you're sweating, but you don't really feel like you're sweating. But if you're snowboarding or skiing, similar situation. Hydration is going to be a huge key. And I'm talking at least 100 ounces. It might seem like a lot, but it's really not as much as you think. And then factor in if it's hot outside or you're super active for a long time, you're going to need far more than that. And on this particular hike, the beauty of it was we did exactly that. We took the water, and as we kept drinking it, we knew that our bags were going to get lighter and it was going to get easier, which was great. And that's ultimately what happened. And thankfully we had, the spring if we needed more, because it was the purest water I've ever seen in my life. They literally have a thing where they'll bottle it from that source, which is wild, still wild to me, because you always, you see the water bottles and you think, oh, wow, wonder where this comes from. And you actually get to see where it comes from. It's kind of cool, but I digress. So hydration is going to be big. Electrolytes are the other major key that you are not thinking about right now. Electrolytes, I cannot emphasize how important those are, because those are going to be the things that make you feel like you were hit by a dump truck or not feel like you were hit by a dump truck. So of course you're losing water, but you're losing sodium. You're losing chloride. Sodium chloride is salt, so fortunately it's not that hard to get. Potassium is the other thing. Potassium is the one that usually makes you feel like you were hit by a dump truck. And I like to tell people it's kind of like a seesaw, right? A lot of times you go on a trip or you go out to a restaurant, you eat a really, really good meal. It's really salty because they love to put salt for flavor. And so you have the scale completely tilted. The seesaw is totally tilted on the sodium side, and the potassium side is completely unbalanced. And what happens as a result, you wake up the next day and you either feel like you're super swollen or you feel like you were just slapped around, and get rid of that part. You wake up really swollen, or you feel like you were just hit by a 2x4 because your body's just, oh, this is brutal. A lot of times it's like the hangover feeling. You're depleted on potassium. So if you just focus on potassium, you'll usually be good. And in this case, we definitely focused on potassium because we had to. We had no choice. And we had potassium. We actually have a potassium powder that we like that helps us when we travel. And we usually have it a little bit in general just to make sure our balance is on point. We had some of that before, we had some of that after, and then we had a bunch of it the next day, because what we didn't want was to be held down by, wow, we just hiked 20 kilometers and now it's absolutely brutal. So hydration consistently to the point where it's just an unconscious thing where you have a water bottle there and you're just drinking it. That'll become a great habit. If you start that now when you're not in one of these activities, it will become an automatic thing when you are doing one of these activities. So that would be the third major key for you. And so we're doing this hike and we get to where the mile markers, if you want to call them that, are. And in this case, the kilometer markers. There we go. And we're at the kilometer marker and we see the last one. We're like, oh, this is great. Here's the exit. We see the exit and then we give our ticket to the guy. And then it says, you've finished and you still have longer to go to get to the beach. And so we go another couple kilometers. And then there's another thing that says 2.5 kilometers to the beach. And it just kept going and going. And so we're all excited. Hey, we did it. And it just keeps on going. And I'm like, holy smokes, we got to get there. And it's rough. It's absolutely rough. We did make it ultimately. And along the way, we were hiking and we met a guy. He was from Canada, really nice guy. And he looked like he had been legitimately just getting wrecked by this hike. Because I will say it's downhill. You're going down a bunch of steps. You're going down and winding around. It could be slippery at times. Some of the rocks are slippery. You have to jump across some of the running water. There's some bridges there. He had some, tears in some of his clothes. His palms had gotten kind of scuffed up. He had a couple cuts on his legs, but he was going. And he's like, hey man, I've been out here since 9 a.m. I'm just hoping I make it to the boat at the end. And we were incredulous because we had been going for a much, 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 much lower amount of time time than he had, but we were both at the same point. And we knew that he was busting his tail and he was making it happen, but he was concerned he wasn't going to make it there. But we encouraged him, hey man, you've got this. Just keep on pushing. We're already at, I think we met him at around the 10-kilometer mark. We've only got a few more to go. We know you can get there. You can make this happen. You can get there. And he's thinking, well, I hope I make it to the boat. If I don't, I'm going to be stuck and my family is not here. And this is all. And he was really, really stressed about it. And he had challenged himself to do this hike. He had really wanted to do this for years. He's probably in his mid 50s and he finally got summoned the courage to do it. And what happens? We get onto the boat and we're waiting to depart from the port and we see him running onto the boat. We're like, oh, thank God he made it. But the thing is, the moral here is this is somebody who was really questioning if he could do it. He took his lumps along the way. There was some definite challenges, some definite struggles that were thrown in his path. He slipped a few times. He fell a few times. He got back up and he kept on pushing. And that's the thing I want to also just leave you with here is he kept pushing. He made it happen. And sometimes in diabetes, it is going to be the exact same thing. You are going to get knocked down. You're going to, literally fall on your face. You are going to get smacked around by the blood sugars a little bit. The blood sugars are going to come in and say, hey, I'm going to go low just to mess with you. Or hey, I'm going to go high even though you dosed what seemed to be perfectly for this meal. And you know what? You get to control how you respond to it. And you get to determine, hey, am I going to get up or am I going to let diabetes win? Am I going to pick myself up and dust myself off and say, you know what? I've got this. You have that choice. And this guy said, I have the choice that I'm going to do this hike. And maybe I'm not in the best shape for it. And maybe it's going to be a challenge, but you know what? I'm going to do it. And he did. So that belief, that stuff up here in your brain cannot emphasize how important that is. So that willpower is going to help. Obviously, the tactics, going through the fueling, going through the insulin adjustments, going through the hydration, all going to be huge. But the mindset part of it of believing, yes, it can be done. Oh my God, I've been low before, but that doesn't mean I'm going to go low again, damn it. That is going to be what really changes the game. And that's going to be what's most important to you. Because if you don't have that part of it, you're never going to make it happen. There's that old phrase, you are what you attract, and there's a lot of validity to that. If you don't think you can do this, you don't think you can make it through the hike, you don't think you can do whatever activity it might be, you don't think you can go kayaking all day or camping or, play in a volleyball tournament because your blood sugars are going to go haywire, you're not going to be able to. But if you believe, hey, I know what I'm doing, I've got a framework, I've got a game plan, I've got a care team behind me, I've got people that support me, I've got a backup plan, you will be successful. And if you're not, you're going to be super close and know exactly what to adjust for the next time. That's all I got for you on this episode of the Your Diabetes Insider podcast. So I hope this helped a lot for your next outdoor adventure, maybe, sporting adventure. But either way, take this knowledge, share it with a friend, share it with a family member, somebody that could use it. Definitely let me know. What other topics do you think would be useful for me to cover on this podcast? Let me know. If you're loving what you're hearing, drop us a 5-star review. We would be super grateful for that. And if you need more support, we're always here. We got your back. Catch you in the next one, and God bless.